What's up, traders? Matt from the Trade Brigade here with your earnings roundup for the day. On the left-hand side, as always, we do have the daily time frame, and on the right-hand side, the 30-minute intraday time frame. First thing that we're going to start off with is, of course, Lucid. All right, so let's go ahead and turn on those extended hour sessions and see what's going on with the number. Little bit of a bloodbath here with a move to the downside starting to develop. We haven't quite gotten the numbers just yet, but obviously you can see it's fairly likely that we will get some sort of negative reaction out of the stock. Keep in mind, a lot can happen with any of these companies between now and 9:30 when the bell actually rings, so please reassess and readjust accordingly. However, on Lucid, because it's likely we'll open on a gap down, let's talk through our gap rules. We want to know where the overnight low is, the forecasted opening print, as well as today's low of day. If we take a look at the daily time frame chart now, so left-hand side of the screen, there's a specific framework that we use to play gappers, and this will probably be the theme of today's video for the earnings gaps, right? So if we open here, fail to accept underneath the overnight low, fail to find new sellers there, look for longs back up through the open to close the gap above us. So 25.20 up to 26.20, about $1 move inside of Lucid. If you do it with options, it may be worth your time, considering those are a leveraged asset, correct? So that's what we have to the upside here on scenario number one, the gap and trap move to the upside. Gap and go, on the other hand, would put into place something that looks like this. If we open here, get price acceptance lower, anything that sets up a breakdown of the overnight low, which is also very close to Friday's low, that'd be an area I watch as well. Anything that breaks there, you're just looking for the equal low on the daily, closer to 22, correct? So that's the bearish trade here. And do note that we are in a fairly aggressive downtrend. So we have a move lower, big periods of consolidation, period of consolidation. Maybe we're in store for, again, look at what happened here. This is just an interesting parallel, right? So consolidation looks like we're going to break out to the upside. It all rolls over, right? So here we go, consolidation. Looks like maybe we're going to get a break to the upside. Maybe it rolls over if this earnings gap is kind of the catalyst and we do get the gap and go, meaning the move to the downside. So those are the frameworks that I'll be using to sort of monitor the open inside of Lucid for tomorrow's session. Again, primarily the thing that I will be watching for is the gap and trap. So something that would look like this for longs to close the gap overhead. That's Lucid in a nutshell. Let's continue along here and talk about ZM for Zoom, of course, and zooming in on this one, no pun intended. Terrible joke, I know. What's going on with the earnings numbers? So zooming in on the 30-minute time frame side, you can clearly see just a bit of volatility, to be quite frank with you. A high up here, an overnight low closer to 112. It's not abundantly clear whether or not we'll be opening on a gap up or gap down for tomorrow's session, so we're just going to treat it as if we're opening inside of range. Whenever we're opening inside of range, all we look for are breaks up and out of the prior day's high or down and out underneath the prior day's low. Then from there, you look left on your daily chart and see if we have any other structure that makes that either more attractive or more of a complicated trade to take. As of right now, to the upside, it would seem like there's not a whole lot of structure that will stand in our way for making a move higher. So let's just say we get the break of 135 roughly. On the daily time frame chart, you can see that this move right here was fairly emotional. We would look for a move probably closer to that, right? The top of that downtrend right there, around let's call it 147, right? So that could be an upside move here inside of ZM if we open in range, get some consolidation, then break out of the top end. To the downside, if that does not happen and we just spend all day in today's range, I would want to see it sort of decide, so one way or another, around this pullback low that we formed on today's session. That number is 129.40s. If we're above, lean a little bit more bullish. Acceptance there, probably looking for a breakout higher eventually. Acceptance underneath, and that's where you start looking for the turnaround lower. Maybe we get an equal low to here, that panic from last week, Thursday, around 114.26. Again, as of right now, because we're opening inside of range even after the number was released, it's not abundantly clear what direction this one could go here inside of ZM, so be open to either direction. Next up, we have, it's going to be BLNK, there we go, for Blink Charging Company, right? Zooming in on this guy, what do we have here? So doesn't look like a whole lot actually. So the number didn't actually come out. It looks like it's actually pushed out to 310. I don't know. I suppose maybe there won't be fireworks here inside of Blink. We'll keep an eye on it, right? So apologies for the mishap there. Doesn't look like they've reported yet. But next up would be NVAX for Novavax. What do we have in this name? Zooming in on the daily just to get a little bit of context here. Potential for a double bottom. Let's see how it's reacting in the after hours here. Just like ZM, a fair bit of volatility. Overnight high was way up there around 92, and currently the overnight low is 76. But still just kind of in the middle of the range. So not seeing a whole lot of fireworks here inside of NVAX for an obvious move one way or another, just like we talked about inside of ZM. From the daily perspective, as I pointed out, the only thing to really be watching is the double bottom here, and the break of the neckline is how you get involved. We're nowhere near that, right? That neckline break is potentially 92.85, 93, 95, depending on which of these upper wicks you want to count as the neckline. neckline, it just doesn't look like it's going to be in play right now, considering this pretty large rejection in the first 30-minute bar after the market did close. To the downside, again, it doesn't really look like an easy short here until we can do something like this. If we roll over for an equal low around 72 after this forms as a lower high, so highs, lower highs, lower highs, lower highs, correct? That would set this up as a flush point. Any breaks there do get more interesting to the downside. Let's see what we have for targets. We will likely have to go out and grab some more time here on the daily time frame chart, so a 5-year should do. We're looking for things underneath 72. Let's zoom in on this section here, see what we've got underneath 72. Underneath 72, prior breakout point really around 59.30s. You'll notice that this area right here, so this big support is actually 78, right? So that's not really what we're looking for. From, looking left, there's not a whole lot of structure on that way higher. So 60 could be here sooner rather than later, not lower, later, if this does turn into a lower high flush point. So let me just illustrate that one last time, then we'll continue along here. So any rollover off of bad earnings, if we get price acceptance underneath today's low, a reattempt at 72 off of the lower high sets up the breakdown to get us closer to 60. That's NVAX in a nutshell. Let's continue along here. WDAY, workday, is the next one. And zooming in on the daily for some context here, making a little bit of a dead cat bounce off these lows, but we are in a fairly aggressive downtrend. You can see low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. You get the gist, right? So is this nothing more than just potentially another lower high? I don't know. Let's take a look at the after hours session and what's going on with the number here. This one finally getting us out of range, right? So it's very likely that we open on a gap up here. Again, please keep in mind a lot can change between now and 9:30, but this framework is how we'll attack workday. So overnight high is where? Way up there around 250 roughly. Forecasted opening print here, 243 we'll call it. And then the today's high of day, rather, 231. On the daily time frame chart, what does that leave us with? Well, we're sort of gapping up above this prior area of resistance. Depends. Do we open here? Do we open slightly above? That'll change things just a hair. So keep in mind 243 is an interesting pivot just based on this daily resistance right here. If we open right on it, I would be a little bit more careful and not necessarily look for immediate longs out of the gates, noting that, again, this is a resistance area. It's supply, technically. Maybe people start unloading if they've been bag holding ever since this area right here. I don't know for sure, but it's something to pay attention to. So instead, let's just use the framework we always use. Scenario number 1, gap and trap. What does it look like? If we open here, if we fail to take out the overnight high, basically find no new buyers at that level, trade lower back through the open, you're looking for shorts to fill the gap to the high of today's session at 231.19. If we go on over to the trade tab and take a look at our options chain, what do we have for the put side of things? Not fantastic volume. Whoa, what's going on with the cursor? There we go. Volume's absolutely horrendous here on the put side of things. I would not try to short workday via that. However, if you look right here, easy to borrow, and price point of the stock, 230. It's a little bit expensive for borrowing shares. Nonetheless, if you want to short it, just use the shares. Do not try to play options on this one. So back on over to our charts. That's workday in a nutshell and their current state of gap. HPQ for HP is our next candidate. And zooming in on the daily for that context, as always, this strikes me as an important sort of area. Just because I guess the prior earnings cycle left us a little bit of a gap there. But regardless, zooming in on the 30-minute to see if we have any fireworks. Not really, right? A little bit of a volatility here, but again, just like everything else, kind of right back in the midpoint of today's range. So that's not really telling us a whole lot. What I do like from the daily time frame chart, though, is that we have a nice 3-day balance area that's starting to form. And whenever we have balance, we have really easy rules to follow. It's either going to be a breakout up and over the top. So 34.64 is your breakout point. Again, look left, very emotional selling. The next place that I would expect to act as resistant would be here around 36, not only because it's a whole dollar, but it was the low and then the low here. And then that's where we get the more aggressive breakdown, correct? So that's your upside target on a break of the 3-day balance. It's also very roughly a doubling of the range, which is how we anticipate or measure moves to the up or downside based on a range. So I like that as a potential upside target here. So breakouts take us there, look above and fail. So if we do something like that, fake breakout, trade back down underneath the breakdown or breakout point, you're looking for rotation lower into the low of the balance area, 33.20. So that's a downside trade, right? We're talking about upside, by the way, because we have multiple lower wicks, hammer type candles forming, equal highs, green bodies. It would seem that the buyers are trying to make a stand here, but we'll see. If we rotate underneath the lows of this 3-day balance, then what do we have underneath us? Well, again, it's that gap to fill from the prior earnings cycle. I would look out for 32.50s on a downside move inside of HP. Next up, we have DDD for 3D Systems. Great ticker and company name, to be quite honest with you. And what do we have going on in the after hours? Let's just zoom in on it immediately. Nice move to the upside. So as always, very likely that we open on a gap up. We want to know where the overnight high is. We want to know where the forecasted opening print is, as well as today's high of day, which would represent a gap fill. Keep in mind, a lot can happen between now and 9:30, but this is the framework that we will apply here. For now, looking at this on the daily time frame chart, here's where it gets interesting. Scenario number one is the gap and trap as always. So opening here, failure to take out the high, you get the gist, back down underneath the opening print, there's your gap fill. But what is interesting about this is the fact that this is a double bottom. Here's your neckline. We're gapping above the neckline. So is that more bullish than bearish? Yeah, it's got to be, right? We're making automatically a new higher high. There's no possibility, at least as of right now, that this sets another lower high. So that does start to change the trend to the upside. So maybe we get a little bit of support on the back test of that neckline around 1935. So I would look at that as the first area where if it is short for the gap to start filling, that's the first place I would really start to reevaluate that trade. Let's quickly come on over to this tab. You'll notice that the stock is easy to borrow. Oops, try that one more time. What's going on with my cursor today? It's giving me all sorts of trouble. Regardless, ETB, easy to borrow, and it's a price point where you can easily pay whatever borrow fee. It's not a big deal, right? So I would short the shares. I probably would not look to take puts on this particular name based on the volume that we're seeing there. Back on over to the chart to talk about more scenarios. Something that does this, boom, back through the open. You know that's your short trade right here, but what about this, right? So let's say that does happen and we start supporting here. You start seeing hammer candles that print. That's an area where maybe we turn around, right? And we start moving back to the upside. So a lot of levels to be paying attention to here inside of DDD, but I like this based on the fact that, again, automatically, if we gap up above the neckline of the double bottom, we have ourselves a new higher high and the trend is starting to flip to the upside. I would just remind you that it is in a very aggressive daily downtrend, so there's still a lot of work to be done. I'm not saying that this automatically goes back up to the highs around 34, but it is promising for the start of potentially a change in trend here on our daily time frame. It would be the first higher high that we've seen in quite some time, right? So that's what we have here. Obviously, the gap and go would look something like this. Opening here, bull flag off the open just underneath the overnight high. Anything that sets up a breakout up and over the overnight high, so 21.25. What's your next area to pay attention to? Well, resistance right here around 22.5, right? Definitely something worth trading for. Options or shares, probably shares. Again, if you look at the options volume over here, it's a little bit better on the call side, but ultimately is at such a cheap price point, I would probably opt for the shares. That way you're not getting sort of beat up on this. Even the spread's actually not that bad. So I take it back. This one could be an options candidate based on what we're seeing here on the chain. Okay, so DDD, probably one of the better ones to be watching based on everything we've seen so far in the video. Next up, we have SDC for Smile Direct Club. This used to be a fan favorite. Look at all these levels that we had as it was doing its nonsense back in here. Nonetheless, we got to clean that up, right? That's a hideous sight to look at. What do we have going on with earnings? Let's take a look at the 30-minute time frame. This one, we're not even going to cover it. To be quite frank with you, I mean, look at the range on this thing. It's pathetic. So we have, what is that, 228. Low of day was 214. So you're not even, well, I guess it's slightly above a 10-cent range on the day. That's if you held from the exact high to the exact low. 10 cents on like a $2 stock, I would rather just trade options somewhere else and not get caught up in the slow, grindy nature of this thing, which, seems like everyone's lost their interest in SDC. So this, probably not something to watch in terms of earnings, just a lot of volatility, overnight high, overnight low, nonetheless kind of middling back out in here. We'll see if it's a gap up or gap down for tomorrow's session. If it's a major gap and we can move significantly outside of this range, so I'm talking like, 25 cents, 50 cents on something this cheap outside of this range, maybe it's worth watching, but in terms of where it's at right now, this is like, do not touch, stay far away. Smile Direct Club, nothing good going on here. Next and lastly, we're going to wrap it up with LAZR for Luminar. And what do we have going on here? We're going to clean up those two random lines that we've got, obviously from, historical things that we were watching. In terms of the earnings, not a whole lot. Again, very, very boring. DDD seems to be the best one that we've covered today so far. Maybe Lucid as well, or ZM. For now, right in the midpoint of the range. Not a whole lot to read into. From the daily time frame chart, just for a little bit of context, we don't even have a clean setup unfolding here. Sure, you've got a little bit of a higher low from here to here. You could call it that. But again, just opening in this chop zone, kind of in the midpoint of today's range, we don't really learn a whole lot about what could potentially unfold into tomorrow's session. Maybe if it's a break of these highs here around 1441, it's a retracement of this poor structure to the downside and we get closer to 1675, but that feels like a little bit of a stretch, especially with, the number coming out and just a very lackluster reaction going sideways in here again, and a breakdown of the lows underneath today's lows, Friday's lows, around 1350. If that goes, you're looking for the equal low here, which let's just put a number to it, is roughly 1222. So those are our earnings candidates for tomorrow. Pretty boring, actually, now that I'm sort of looking at this in retrospect. Again, if I'm going to make it simple for you guys, I would watch Lucid, I would watch ZM, and I would watch DDD for 3D systems. That's going to wrap it up. If you enjoyed the video or learned anything new, let me know in the comment section or by giving the video a thumbs up. Don't forget our main channel is linked in the description, and all of that being said, I wish you a green trading week.